what's up YouTube? Today we're gonna go over one of the greatest questions that have stumped mankind since the dawn of humankind, which is explosive arrow ballista totems the next great build disaster? This is something that us Neanderthals have been wondering for millions of years, and we are finally able to put a rest to this issue. Now, the reason why I ran into this issue was because I was on Twitter. I saw one of my ex-favorite streamers tweet this, and I don't want to mention any names in case they decide to quit PoE or something like that. But basically, they said, explosive arrow ballistas is the next great build disaster. You can quote me on that. And now, with a quote like this, it means that people probably aren't really super informed about what's good or bad about EA ballista totems. So I wanted to make a quick little video and explain the pitfalls, what's good about it, what to look out for, answer some of the common questions about the build. I won't be doing a full build guide right away right now because I do think that there's other really good content creators like Tuna and Pausteron that have made really detailed guides that you can check out. But let's get straight into it and see, will this be the next great build disaster, and will this cause you to quit PoE and maybe return later? Let's see. So this playstyle, have to like the totem playstyle. So this is about playstyle. This is the number one most important thing for a build, and I need to stress this probably multiple times. It is all about the playstyle. You can play the lowest DPS build possible, but if you enjoy the playstyle, you will be having fun, right? You can be playing the highest DPS build possible. If you don't enjoy the playstyle, you'll be hating life. So number one thing to understand is you have to like the totem playstyle. The totem playstyle for EA Ballista totems does have a problem where it has 3 layers of delayed damage. First layer, you have to place the Ballista totem down. Second layer, you have to wait for the Ballista totem to shoot and the fuse to detonate. Third layer, you have to wait for the ignite damage to tick. So it's not like a super responsive playstyle. And this goes for like people who ask me about Poison Lightning Strike. I played Poison Lightning Strike yesterday, and then I hopped on my Trinity Lightning Strike character, and it felt like a world of difference, right? One was instant damage, the other is delayed damage. Huge difference. The ignite damage ticking, you can get it to tick faster with nodes on a tree, with Dyadian Dawn, and it does make it feel a lot better. Now, another important thing about the totem playstyle is a lot of people feel like, oh, do I just put my totems down and do absolutely nothing? Because that's kind of boring. Some people like that though. But that's not necessarily true. You still get to use Frenzy. You can use Frenzy to cull. You can use Frenzy to apply curses if you want. Or you can have the Flam Ring. But you get to still have some, like, something you're doing, right? So you can shoot Frenzies. You also need to throw down Flame Surge Totem, or Flame Surge Trap, or Lightning Trap. Now, the reason you want to use Flame Surge Trap is because it inflicts, like, extra burn if they're standing on the burning ground. So it's a pretty involved playstyle, right? You don't just sit around doing nothing. You still can do some stuff to min-max your damage. So it's not the worst playstyle in the world. And most importantly, the Ballista's auto-aim, not having to aim your skill, is probably one of the biggest quality of lives out there. And also, this playstyle may seem bad or boring, but this playstyle is kind of safe for bosses, right? You can literally hide in the corner, cower away while your totems kill everything. And the ignite damage ticking, ignite damage is probably one of the best damage types in the game for bossing because you don't need to be anywhere near the boss. Your totems don't even need to hit the boss anymore, and you can still be doing the ignite damage. So it's a very high uptime damage playstyle, but the damage is really delayed. So next up, we have how expensive will the gear be? Now, this is actually a huge issue that I see a lot of misinformation out there. A lot of people believe, and myself included in the beginning before I did some research, that the gear for EA Ballista totems will be extremely expensive. I've even seen some people say that Dyadian Dawn is going to be like a multi-exalt unique. Now, most important unique for making this build feel good is a T3 rarity Dyadian Dawn. Dyadian Dawn, no matter what happens, will not be super expensive. It is impossible by supply and demand. That's like saying a gold rim or a tabula will become super expensive. Next up, we have Stormcloud is not that far off a +3 Thicket Bow. If you look at the POBs and you replace a Stormcloud with a +3 Thicket Bow, I'm not really sure exactly the damage difference, but it's like 10 to 20%, let's say. And the reason being is that Stormcloud has a lot faster attack speed. It allows you to stack your fuses faster. So if you don't have a lot of attack speed on your gear, Stormcloud is a very, very suitable replacement. So you don't even need to go into the process of crafting a +3 Dicka bow. Also, the process of crafting a +3 Dicka bow is pretty set in stone in terms of cost. It's about using essences, it's about using meta mod crafting, and people know how to do it, right? But obviously it's not very beginner friendly if you've never crafted before. But a Stormcloud is a perfectly acceptable replacement, and a Stormcloud is extremely, extremely affordable early game, and it will not be super, super expensive. Now, every single other piece of item on this build is just rares with priority on spell suppression, life, resist, and dot multi. So this is pretty much every single build in the game. To say this build's gear will be super, super expensive is basically saying every single build's gear in the game will be super expensive at league launch because it has life, suppression, and resist. Now, another common thing that people say is that Rain of Splinters is needed on the build and that it will be super, super expensive in order to play the build. However, this is a misconception. Rain of Splinters is not needed on single target. Having 2 extra projectiles does not mean that you will have more fuses in the single target. That is not how it works. Now, the reason Rain of Splinters is good is because it helps with your map clear a little bit, and it gets more explosions out when you're mapping. So it is still very, very strong if you can afford it, but you do not need to afford it at all to do some bossing. You do not need it at all to do clear on maps. And in the end, the build will be cheaper than Toxic Rain. There's no need for the expensive Chaos Clusters to get your damage to a high enough level because the damage is already so high. So in reality, this build is really, really affordable. Many people have done this build on SSF, played through many, many times. Diadian Dawn is an item you'll find many times in the SSF playthrough to like level 95. So the build is not cheap at all. It is not going to be expensive, even if the build is super, super meta. So next up, we have a pretty big problem that people seem to have, which is how bad is leveling the build. Now, granted, the build has a lot of travel nodes, but it is made up for by using the strongest archetype in the game, which is Stormblast Mine / Oos into Armageddon Brand / Cremation with the fire damage craft on your wands and early game wand crafts. It does not really matter where you are on a tree. Your character could be naked with the wand crafts and you will be able to breeze through the campaign. And it's not like the build takes no damage nodes at all. So you can see here, you can see the travel is really, really far. You have to go really, really far to get the totem nodes on the bottom and then the totem nodes in the bottom right. So that is a pretty big problem. A lot of people don't like having all these travel nodes. But the nice part about the travel nodes is you do pick up a lot of resist. You can see here, Sentinel right here, some resist. You can even take the Elemental Mastery resist right here. And there's even some resist over here at the start. So you get a lot of resist, and one of the main things that beginners struggle with is you don't get many resists, and you end up dying a lot because resists are just OP. If you're playing without capped res, you are going to be a dead player. And another thing that's really bad for new players is having to level gems and offhands and save a bow and quivers for swap. If you actually saw me doing the leveling run, I actually ended up with no quiver, and I had to buy a Grove bow, white bow from the vendor because I was too dumb to buy or save up a bow and quiver. And it is always annoying for a new player to have to swap builds. It's not exactly the smoothest process. A lot of people enjoy playing the exact same skill from start to finish. And this is also an archetype swap in that you're going from caster wands to a bow and quiver. But with a well-written enough guide and you telling them when you have to swap what gems you have to buy. So as you look at Tuna's build over here, his PoE literally is foolproof and literally tells you what you need to buy and level in offhand, right? So by saying that the build is really, really bad for leveling is kind of untrue. It's kind of not too shabby for leveling. It's not exactly the fastest campaign clear in the world, but it is still very, very fast in finishing the campaign. I'm pretty sure you could do it in around 4 hours or so. And this is purely off the strength of Armageddon Brand / Cremation. So now we go into the juicy part, and the reason why the person said that this build will be such a big disaster was because there are some big mistakes beginners can make. So I'm going to go over the mistakes that you can make so you can decide for yourself, are you stupid enough to make these mistakes? Like, how dumb are you as a person? So this build is a good check for your intelligence, right? So elemental equilibrium, this is the main thing. Do not have flat fire damage anywhere on your gear. I don't really know how hard this is. Maybe some people have flat fire damage on a jewel they might have, or they might have it on a jewelry, or they might even have it on their bow. But basically, you don't want any flat fire damage on your gear because of the way elemental equilibrium works. So the way elemental equilibrium works is that hits that deal elemental damage remove exposure to those elements and inflict exposure to other elements. And this means that you will not inflict fire exposure if you hit with fire damage. So that's why the build on Elementalist stacks cold and lightning damage, and you are able to inflict fire exposure. Now you might think, oh, that's just a 25 res difference. But in reality, with Mastermind of Discord, which is extra 25, you're looking at plus 50 res swing, which is absolutely crazy. So that's why you have to make sure not to have flat fire damage anywhere on your gear. Now, the next part is kind of like a crazy talk. A lot of people always talk about explosive arrow breakpoints, and there's so many breakpoints you need to know about, and how can you actually figure out the breakpoints. I can summarize it really easily for you. You stack as much attack speed as possible until you have 2.5 attacks per second. Attack speed does not really have a diminishing return in that your damage will fall off a cliff if you reach too much attack speed, right? There is no such thing. You just will reach 20 fuses and you'll waste the extra fuses because you can't go over 20 fuses. But in a lot of scenarios, you might not reach the 20 fuses because you don't put down all of the Ballista totems. So you pretty much just stack as much attack speed as possible. This should be very, very easy for beginners to figure out. They don't need a PhD or rocket science to figure out that attack speed is good, so I should get as much attack speed on the build as possible. Now next, you want to get accuracy so you can have a 100% chance to hit. Now this is something that a lot of people don't realize. They think that explosive arrows is a spell or something. But basically, you still need to get accuracy, so you need to run precision, and you need to get one accuracy roll on your jewelry or ring or quiver or something like that, and you get a 100% chance to hit. Now lastly, another pitfall is having Pierce Fork Chain on gear. So a lot of people have this quiver, penetrating arrow quiver. So say you pick up this quiver at level 36 and it's a pierce quiver. What this means is that if you have a boss, the arrow will just pierce through the boss and then you won't have a fuse on the boss, right? So this is a complete disaster, and doing this will effectively completely negate your damage, right? So this is why you can completely mess up the build. So just make sure no fire damage on gear, get as much attack speed as possible, get accuracy to get 100% chance to hit, and don't get Pierce, Fork, or Chain on gear. So if you think that this build is too complicated for you because you cannot figure out these 4 aspects, then you probably shouldn't play the build. But if you can't figure out these aspects, then how are you going to play any other build, right? That's like saying like, if you don't get attack speed on a bow build, then you're not going to do well. If you accidentally get like Pierce, Fork, or Chain on a bow build, you're going to mess it up, right? So it's all the same thing. It's not really as big of a deal as it may think. And next up, we have, will the build have bad clear? So a lot of people are wondering, how bad is the clear for Ballista totems? Well, the clear for Ballista totems is pretty amazing because of Ignite Proliferation. Ignite Proliferation is insane for clear. If there's any mobs that spawn extra, Ignite Proliferation puts down this little fire, ignited ground, and every single mob that comes into it will die. So it's extremely, extremely strong. I also think it's pretty good for the Arch Nemesis mechanic. Now, even though the damage is delayed, the time spent clearing maps is low. And this is purely because Ignite Proliferation is just that strong. So even though you might think, oh, the damage is delayed, if you actually time the time you spend in the map, it is going to be very, very low on average to most builds, right? It is just the illusion of that delayed damage results in a slow map clear. Now, the biggest problem is you have to backtrack for loot. So you'll be like this person right here. They're going back to the Forbidden Woods map, trying to find that little chaos that drops somewhere that they heard on a loot filter. So you'll pretty much be running around like this person trying to find the currency that your loot filter will show. And this is a pretty big problem and it's pretty annoying. But if you don't feel like this is going to be a huge issue or deal breaker, then you should definitely play this build. Now, this is another issue that gets floated around a lot. Is recovery a huge issue? And recovery is a big issue if you don't solve it or address it at all. Now, Toxic Rain Champion, which was the most popular build last league, had the exact same recovery issues. Toxic Rain does not have any leech. You can't get life gain on hit. it has the exact same issue, and it solves it with the same exact way. It uses profane chemistry and life flask gain 1 charge every 3 seconds. On hard boss fights, they would sometimes swap in 2 life flasks and problem solved, right? And you can also run Vitality Aura. You can have multiple life flasks with the Mastery. You could even use the new Recoup on Ring, which is a new mod on rings now. And if you really wanted to, you could even get life regen suffix. You can get probably like 500-600 life regen or even more with Vitality. And this is a complete non-issue. If you have brains, you will be able to solve this issue. You can run multiple life flasks. Maybe not 4, but it will definitely be a solvable issue and it will not be a deal breaker at all. Now, next up, a lot of people also say this, is the EA Ballista Totem squishy? I see someone playing the build and it just got one-shotted. EA Ballista Totem is not a squishy build. It has Grace, it has D-Term, it has Defiance Banner, it has 100% spell suppression. These 4 things will mean that no build will ever be squishy. And most importantly, it also has totems, also taunt when placed down. So this is a mastery. As you can see here, it says that totems taunt enemies around them for 1 second when summoned. And you also have the totem mastery that does 5% of damage from hits is taken from your nearest totem's life before you. So this is kind of like a little bit of a really bad mind over matter. But basically, as you can see, this build has like 70% evasion, 80% physical damage reduction, 100% spell suppression, totems that taunt, 5% damage that goes to your totem. So in no way is this build squishy. There is no way that this build is squishy. The only way that this build could be squishy is if you skipped out on all of the life nodes so that you end up with like 4k or so. So overall conclusion, right? We went over every single point that most people have with this build and we explained it in an objective manner. Well, I don't really have any vested interest in this build. I'm not playing it. I don't like delayed damage. So I do not care about Ballista Totem. Now, this build will not be the great build disaster. If this build is the great build disaster, it is a huge indictment on the intelligence of the PoE community. Because that means the PoE community would have ignored all the wonderful videos that Tuna and Palsteron made that stress that you do not get fire damage on your gear, do not get pierce on your quiver, right? But most importantly, make sure you like the totem playstyle before you commit to this build. Because the build has the damage, even if you make the character naked, this probably still has like multi-million ignite DPS. But people do not like the totem playstyle sometimes. People cannot stand the delayed damage, even though the map clear is not really that much slower. So make sure you like it. Maybe try out a leveling run and you'll thank me for it. But basically, build will be very, very strong. No fire, as you can see here. And yeah, it's kind of strong. Actually, this picture, this guy ain't looking too strong. Maybe this is like someone who has EE on their gear or something. But basically, thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you find more Mirrors, Exalts, and Mage Bloods than me. I'm still working on the Berserker Lightning Strike. We are able to find a better solution to Brittle without Secrets of Suffering, and I'm pretty excited to share it with you guys. But basically, EA is not the next build disaster. If you can stand the totem playstyle, it is the strongest league starter that you can possibly play. And I hope you find more Mage Bloods, Exalts, and Headhunters than me. And see you next time. Bye.